And yes, I finally completed zuise. And I've got to say, I'm still not enlightened. I'm still affected by causes and conditions. Um, Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see each of you. Yeah, it's about 78 degrees here, and the humidity is about 50 and rising. So I'm not sure what it's like in the place where you live, but it's very summery here. So I'd like to begin by thanking Dokai and the staff and the board and all the practitioners and all beings who support that beautiful space and take care of it called Hokioji. I am very grateful for the great care of the land and the space. And I appreciate the energy and the practice in upholding Katagiri Roshi's visions. So deep bows to all of you, including the deer, squirrels, eagles, mice, and all the little critters as well. I'd also would like to acknowledge that I'm on Dakota and Anishinaabe homelands, and that I have benefited from their care of this place that we call Minnesota. And I'm committed to continuing to untangle our karma. I offer homage to the Buddhas and ancestors for their great teaching and practicing the way. I offer homage to our Asian ancestors, including Suzuki Roshi, Katagiri Roshi, and Uchiyama Roshi, for transmitting their teaching here on this land. I offer homage to all our teachers, humans, birds, water, all beings who teach us daily, moment by moment. And I offer homage to our family and friends who support our practice. I'm grateful. Today, I'd like to talk on a koan that I've been studying. And actually, the study just didn't begin with preparing for this talk. It's actually been a lifetime study. And at times it's more, I bring more attention to this study than other times. And I can say that the past several years, I have been investigating causes and conditions and karma, and what does that mean to me as a human, as a Zen priest, trying to become more human and live a fuller life in relation to myself and to the world in which I live. So the koan is Baizhang's fox, and I'd like to use Baizhang's Japanese name, Hakujo, and also his student, Kwanbo. I'd like to use his Japanese name, Obaku. And I apologize if I am mispronouncing their names, but I have a better shot, quite honestly, at the Japanese names than I do at the Chinese. So, in full transparency. In part of what is fascinating to me too is these teachers, Hakujo and Ubaku and Naisun and Joshu, they all knew each other and knew of each other. So there is a connection there. And part of my investigation of this koan was to also explore the connection of these Chinese Zen masters to my capacity, because I feel that the koan is in relationship to these teachers, to the culture in which they lived, to the time and the place in which they lived. So it's all connected. It's not just for me just studying this koan, but also kind of opening it up to a wider view, a fuller view, and this view is is endless, because the story is endless as well. So I'd like to also say that I'm committed again to a half hour, because I'm very interested and curious to hear your view on your comments and questions in relation to this koan, because it's particular to our experience, human experience, and it's also universal to the world in which we live. I think it's relatable and very relevant, excuse me, to this time. One of the books that I read or am reading in preparation for this talk, and some of you may have it or know of it, is The Sayings and Doings of Haichong, which is Baizhang. It's translated by Thomas Cleary, and also the koan is in this book as well, which is very beautiful. The koan is also in in the Gateless Gate, and that's the text that I'll be using. And it's also, you can find it in the Book of Serenity in case 8. So there are several references to this koan. So I'd like to read the koan first. And as always, I'm probably more ambitious in my investigation than what I have time for. So I am okay with just cutting it off at a little after 10. The case. Whenever Master Hakujo delivered a sermon, an old man was always there listening with the monks. When they left, he left too. One day, however, he remained behind. The master asked him, "What man are you standing in front of me?" The old man replied, "Indeed, I'm not a man. In the past, in the time of Kashapa Buddha, I lived on this mountain as a Zen priest. On one occasion, a monk asked me, 'Does a perfectly enlightened person fall under the law of cause and effect or not?' I answered, 'He does not.' Because of this answer, I fell into the state of fox for 500 lives. Now I beg you, Master, excuse me, please say a turning word on my behalf and release me from the body of a fox." Then he asked, "Does a perfectly enlightened person fall under the law of cause and effect or not?" The master answered, "The law of cause and effect cannot be obscured." Upon hearing this, the old man immediately became deeply enlightened. Making his bow, he said, "I have now been released from the body of the fox and will be behind the mountain. I dare to make a request of you, Master. Please perform my funeral as you would for a deceased priest." The master had the Ino strike the anvil. with a gavel and announced to the monks that after the meal there would be a funeral for a deceased priest. The monks wondering, saying, "All are healthy. No one is sick in the infirmary. What's this all about?" After the meal, the master led the monks to the foot of a rock behind the mountain, and with his staff poked out the dead body of a fox. He then performed the ceremony of cremation. That evening, the master ascended the seat in the hall and told the monks of the whole story. Obaku thereupon asked, the man of old missed the turning word and fell into the state of fox for 500 lives. Suppose every time he answered he made no mistake, what would happen then? The master said, just come nearer and I'll tell you. Obaku then went to the master and slapped him. The master clapped his hands and laughing aloud said, I thought the barbarian's beard was red, but here is a barbarian with a red beard. There's four things that stand out and are alive for me in this koan. One is the law of causation, karma. Two, the intersection of the relative and the absolute, the unknowable. Three, the shapeshifter, the fox. And four, the power of words. And some people think that they look at this koan and think it's a fairy tale. Some people think it's a drama. Some people think it's real. Well, I'm like, maybe not. And maybe there's some truth and value within all those ways of viewing. Going back to the case, initially there was what appeared to be a man who always came with the monks to listen to the teacher. And when the monks left, he left too. One day, he decided to stay behind. And the teacher asked him a curious question. What man are you standing in front of me? And the man replied, indeed, I'm not a man. And then he goes on to say he has lived on this mountain since the time of Kashyapa Buddha, since the time of the sixth Buddha, before Shakyamuni Buddha, who was the seventh Buddha. So he'd been living on this mountain a long time. According to the koan, he'd been living, we know, in a fox body for 500 years. It's unclear how many years he was living as a human prior to that. So he's been living on this mountain a long time, and his name was Hakujo too, because in the Chinese tradition, if you live on the mountain and you're the teacher, that's your name. So he then said, a monk asked him, does a perfectly enlightened person fall under the law of cause and effect or not? And his answer was, he does not. And because of this, he fell into a state of fox. And this is interesting to me as well, because I don't know, maybe there's some foxes in this listening to us right now in this gallery, as well as monks. So these foxes in some cultures are considered shapeshifters. And I think that in shapeshifting, there's a possibility to shape the shift within the matrix. And in some cultures, the fox is considered a ghost. And then he asked the teacher for a turning word to release him from the body of a fox. And I was like, you know, there's been times in my life when I was like, who can help me? Who has a turning word? Who has a word that can help me pivot this mind and the perception of this mind-body complex in a way where I am no longer suffering, or I can experience some release from the suffering. So I feel like this fox has wisdom because he went to the right person. He went to Hakujo, who was able to offer him a turning word, which changed his whole conditions. And the teacher answered, the law of cause and effect cannot be obscured. Upon this, the old man was deeply enlightened and bowed to the teacher in gratitude. And then there's other translations to the law of cause and effect cannot be obscured. Another one is he cannot ignore cause and effect. Another one was he cannot be blind to cause and effect. So cause and effect exist in the relative realm as well as affecting our capacity to awaken to what is actually happening. To me, the law of karma is complicated and complex. And maybe there are foxes and enlightened beings in this gallery that can help us. I'm not enlightened. I am very much unraveling my karma around causes and conditions which involve my individual karma, which involve my family karma, which involve collective karma, which involve my ancestors and their karma. So I cannot begin to say that I have a clear understanding of karma. I do not. I do understand it's very complex and complicated. I too have this desire for enlightenment. And this desire just didn't come with my practice of Zazen. It's been evolving since I was an adolescent. And when I was practicing yoga as a young adult, I heard that if you circumambulated Mount Kailash, you would burn karma for like many lifetimes. And the possibility of being enlightened as a result of that experience was quite high. And I'm like, oh man, I'm there. So I went to Mount Kailash. I circumambulated it. And I had experiences. I had experiences where I felt the 10,000 suns were penetrating my whole being. And I also saw the garbage that people had left behind on the mountain. And then when I came home, I had this peak experience that needed to be digested, but I also had my personality and my way of being in the world that needed taken care of. It wasn't erased. So that was a an important experience for me, because quite honestly, I was deluded, because I actually felt if I would go around this mountain, I'd be a whole different being. And yes, I was impacted and affected. Simultaneously, I still needed to take care of my historical karma. So this to me is the relative and the absolute. It's intersecting and interweaving in space and time. They're not separate. And this historical karma is endless, and actually it's the compost for our bodhisattva vow, because without it, what would we be? I mean, yeah, what would I be without my experiences, without my ancestors, without my family, without community? And I look at the Buddha, and the Buddha was enlightened. I believe he was enlightened. I want to say that. And he continued to practice until his death. And he experienced sickness, old age, and death. He didn't escape it. And I feel that he taught us how to live within our conditions and not to spiritually bypass our karma, our causes and conditions. Recently, I've been visiting with a Zen teacher, and we're all, there is no escape to death. It's like, not to be a downer, but death is certain. What's uncertain is the time of death and when it will happen. So in visiting this teacher, I'm like, wow, he doesn't, my perception of him is right now, he's not falling into causes and conditions. He's folding into causes and conditions. He's folding into what's arising in the present moment, in the conversations we're having. And this folding into, for me, it's difficult to express because it's not a collapse. And the experience is one of luminosity within the moment. It's quite inconceivable to this mind. And it's beautiful in its expression. I want to just take a moment and breathe, because I can see that I have too much, which is part of my karma. So I want to talk a little bit about this. There's a beautiful book called Enlightenment Unfolds: The Essential Teachings of Zen Master Dogen. In Dogen 2, he says, an action that embodies compassion is wholesome, and one that does not is unwholesome. Any action, small or large, affects self and others. Cause brings forth effect. Thus, the dualistic perspective of Buddhist ethics, good and bad, right and wrong, is based on non-dualism, which I think is brilliant and hard to understand. And also, I've had experiences, and maybe you have too, where the actions have been upright and appearingly wholesome, and yet the result is wrong. It's like, how did that happen? I thought that I was doing what was kind and generous, but the result was tangled. So I think there's also, and where does this tanglement come from? Does it come from the past? Where is it coming from? And that for me is the complexity that I choose not to put my energy into trying to figure it out. And yet to actually work with what is actually happening in this moment. Not the way I wish it was, not the way I wanted it to be, but what's actually happening here and now. So I just want to say that I am responsible for my actions, and I'm responsible for the consequences. And the teachings, the process sometimes that emerge from the teachings is messy. That's the human condition at times. The untangling of the messiness has many jewels in it. And I have compassion for myself. I have compassion for this monk and the unintended consequences of speech and actions that have pivoted the life in unanticipated ways. I mean, he was asked a question. Do enlightened people, are they affected by causes and conditions? And he said no. And he was like, shh. He was thrown into a whole new realm. So, I mean, and that's my experience too. I don't know if you've had that experience where you've said something and all of a sudden you're in a wholly different reality, or what appears to be a reality, which was unintended. So I want to say with Zazen, with Uchiyama Roshi, he says, facing the reality beyond thinking is to let go of thought. This doesn't mean we stop thinking rationally or intellectually, nor does it mean we do things without thinking. We have the possibility to see what is actually happening, to see the reality beyond thinking, to see the mind is not fixed, the self is not fixed. This is the hope. So what I hear Uchiyama Roshi saying is that to go beyond the superficial understanding that I see and to go underneath it, to the possibility of where wisdom lives and emerge from that place, to cultivate a flexibility of presence to the changing conditions, to the interrelationship of the greater network. I am a frog. I am a frog in this well, and I'm looking at the sky and I'm thinking, oh, wow, it's a beautiful world, but I'm only seeing this much of that world. The sky is vast. So because I am just seeing this much, when I am interconnected, I have the possibility of seeing the beyond what I'm capable of seeing. I want to take 7 minutes here, and I want to talk about Ubaku in this koan. So Ubaku was a student of Hakujo, and he would later be a great Zen teacher. And he too, there is a book about him as well. And one of the things that I learned in listening to Okamura Roshi is that in Hakuho's lineage, it was skillful means to shout, to hit, to talk or by talking what I would consider nonsense, would be skillful means in order to wake the person up, to stop thinking and go beyond thinking. So it was a practice. So when Ubaku approached Hakujo and slapped him, he didn't let me read. It's better to read, so you know I'm not making stuff up, but I am too, because I'm a fox too. Ubaku went to Hakujo and slapped the master's face. This is an interesting example of Dharma combat between a master and a disciple. However, my teacher once told me regarding Ubaku's action, you shouldn't think that Ubaku actually slapped the master's face. He would merely have made the gesture of doing so as a response in Dharma combat. As a disciple, he would have stopped his hand before it reached Hakujo's face in deference to the position of his teacher. So that was important to me, because these guys, they're kind of aggressive, but they do have boundaries and they do have compassion. So in closing, I would like to read a poem. And I feel this is called The First Free Women. It's about the Therigatha nuns, the elder nuns who were practiced with the Buddha and who were arhats themselves. And I feel that this poem is relatable to the koan in that there is an action of going forward into the unknown that has more possibilities than what is known, in transforming our stories, in cultivating flexibility beyond fear and beyond our karma. We are more than our karma, and we're not separate from our karma. So I just want to read this poem. I kind of like it, I gotta say. Mita was one of the arhats. The name of the poem is Friend. Full of trust, you left home and soon learned to walk the path, making yourself a friend to everyone and making everyone a friend. When the whole world is your friend, fear will find no place to call home. And when you make the mind your friend, you'll know what trust really means. Listen, I have followed the path of friendship to its end, and I can tell you with absolute certainty, it will lead you home. Thank you. Thank the foxes and thank the humans and thank all beings. So I encourage you and invite you, please bring your voice. into the circle. Ryushin,
Onryu.
my dragon friend.
Actually, I'm not dragon. My Ryu is a different character. But
Oh.
That's a different story.
You're shape-shifting.
So this character is asked a question, and he says no about cause and effect. And then he has 500 years. And during that 500 years, it had to occur to him that the answer no was incorrect. And in a binary world, the answer yes would have been correct. So he had 500 years to consider yes was the correct answer. And yet he needs confirmation from a teacher, because I think his yes is still full of doubt. It's like, yeah, but how can that be? But he hears it from somebody else. And then the yes, I think, this is my humble opinion, goes beyond the conceptual. And then he actually kind of owns that answer. And that's what breaks the karma. But it seems silly to have 500 years. Let's see, I said no, and that had consequences. And so the answer must have been yes, right? So, thank you for your talk.
So I appreciate your response. And we're looking at it from here. I mean, I'm thinking, there have been times in my life where I've been like, how could I do that? And if the pivot to me is the strength of the story is within the relationship between the teacher and the student and all beings. Yeah. And there are times when the turning word, right? The turning word of a teacher can just blow the relative wide open, and the world all of a sudden is different. It's beyond concepts. It's beyond what's knowable. It's unknowable. And yeah, so I appreciate your comment. And may we find people who can support us in sometimes what we think makes sense, but what's manifesting is not making sense. 500 years as being in a fox body, that's some pretty heavy karma, unless you enjoy being a fox. I mean, I've never been a fox, so maybe it is enjoyable. I don't know. But I've heard it takes 500 lifetimes minimum to be enlightened. Thank you for your comment. Oh.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're great. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you.
Thank you.
I think this idea of giving the incorrect answer is an interesting one, and why is it incorrect? And it certainly had consequences, but it's this idea that, in my mind, it's he's being told people who are enlightened are not different from you and I. We're all in the same boat when it comes to cause and effect. And so this always It's always been an interesting idea for me that this binary, are you enlightened or are you not? And I don't see that it's possible that you're just enlightened and that's the ball game. I think for most of us, yeah, I'm enlightened sometimes. I really am. And then 10 minutes later, I'm bad news. And I can sort of see that moving, but I can't imagine, frankly, being enlightened on a permanent basis with this brain. Just not, it's not going to happen. And so I just wanted to comment on that sense of binary enlightenment versus not. And thank you, Onryu.
Thank you. That is wonderful, because we think we're enlightened and we're done. No, I'm sorry. I had a teacher who once said, a yoga teacher who used to say, I'm Shiva, I'm shit, I'm Shiva, I'm shit. It's like you go back and forth and around and through. So yeah, thank you, Paul. I appreciate that. Any foxes or humans want to come forward?
Onryu?
Yes, Kaikan. Good
Yeah,
to see you.
same here. As you were talking, I went back in my memory to till I was 17. So whatever that is, I'm now 74. So times change. I was a seminarian in a Catholic seminary. I was a pretty bad seminarian by then. But I was talking to some other seminarians, and it was about good and bad and opposites of various sorts. I think we were talking about good music and bad music or something, but he said, no, there's no real good and bad. At which point I thought, yeah, well, then there's no right and wrong.
Mm.
And then I sort of felt like the earth was dissolving under my feet. And I hurried up and got away from that insight. And it took me about, I don't know, 50 more years to get closer to it. But it's when you talk about a turning word, there wasn't even a turning word here. It was just maybe it was that the word itself was what my fellow seminarian had said to me. I don't really remember all the details of this because it's a while ago. I just remember the feeling of the terror of not having left and right, not having yes and no, just. And I was also thinking at the time, this was the year that I had been in a civil rights march in Marquette Park, Illinois, with MLK, and I was thinking to myself, there has to be a good and bad because I've seen some really bad stuff, and so I couldn't handle the duality, and I'm slowly trying to pull the threads of my life together so that I can handle it. I guess it happens when you get old, so or it might happen anyway. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Yeah. Living in non-duality is no small matter at all, as you have direct experience of. And the precepts are very, very important and not separate. So thank you.
Hi, Onryu.
Hi, Adam.
I was wondering if you could say more about, um, you know, the answer and then being thrown into a new realm, right? Yeah, it seems, and it's both the power of the question and the power of the answer. Because if you're asked a question and the answer, you say something, for like, you say yes, you're, I don't know, you change in that answer because your thoughts, your mind, your whatever, and then that impacts you. You could say no, and that also impacts you. You could say yes and not believe it, and that impacts you. You can say no and not believe it. Or you can just be like, I don't know. And the fact that you're posed a question and you don't know, that also like, can throw you into a different realm. So I don't know. That just kind of struck me, the power of how we respond, the words we use, the questions we're asked, and all of that, and how actually, all across our life, it can throw us into new realms because of the ways that we relate to ourselves and what it means to answer in a certain way and what it means to say certain things. And so, I was struck by the way you framed that. I'm wondering if you have how you understand that.
I think you articulated it in a very succinct, precise way, because that's one of the teachings I feel of this koan was the power of words. And not that I didn't have that awareness before. I mean, I understand that there's power in words, and there's also who's talking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who's talking, and where are they within? I mean, we say the Buddha feel we're all equal, but in the relative world, that's not the case. There's power over, power under processes going on all the time. Even in this little gallery, there's many dynamics going on. And the decisions, I think I can relate to that monk who at the time believed it was a no. And at the time, those were his causes and conditions that were arising, and that was his response. And then all these, I say, thrown into a parallel universe, because I understand that experience, because there have been decisions that I have made in my life where, looking back, I'm just wowed. It's like, I never expected that to happen, and yet it did. So I need for me to focus on good and bad and right and wrong, and it's not helpful for me at all. Yes, I'm in alignment with my vow. I'm in alignment with my precepts, and they're important. And like I said earlier, it's so complicated and so complex because I'm also interacting with other people's karma, their individual karma, their ancestral karma, their community karma, their family karma. And there's a larger network operating with all of us too. So I can only deal with what is happening here and now with the understanding that I have in this moment. So that's what I can offer. Yeah, I'm not, I'm binary. Even the Buddha said, when he got up from his seat and he went to teach, the first thing he said to his friends is, I have found the middle way, right? He didn't say, I'm enlightened. He said, I found the middle way between very austere practices and what I would say is emptiness. So it's constantly this exploration. What is the middle way in these arising conditions for me? So I'm not at this extreme or I'm not at this extreme. And also, who can I reach out to? Who can I reach out to that could possibly support me unraveling or doing the least amount of messiness as possible? So, yeah. So thank you for the question. I think it's a great question for all of us.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that anybody has on their minds? Well, Jushin, I think that we can do the 4 bodhisattva vows.
All right, let me just take care of a few housekeeping items first. This was the first of our June talks. Next week, it turns out I will be giving the talk.
Oh.
On the 18th, we have Tim Burkett. And on the 25th, we have our own Kyoku. Tracy Whalen will be giving the Dharma talk. Also on the Hokyoji calendar coming up, let's see, the 8th of June, which might be a little bit tight for some people. We have the Loring group coming to Hokyoji. Actually, the True Women's Heart Retreat was this weekend, and it sold out, so we wish them well. And for Hokyoji, I guess our next big thing would be the family weekend is August 11th through the 13th. And Jewel Mirror Session is in August. It's going to be a week later in the month than it normally is. So if everyone's used to it being in the second week, it's going to be in the third week. It's the 19th through the 26th. All right. So yeah, let's end with the 4 vows. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And we hope to see you on another weekend. Or also, we have morning Zazen online Wednesday through Saturday. So, bye.